Oh, there's Kisu, Charles, and then there's the online.
Okay,
She's a
someone,
second.
as long as someone doesn't steal my question, it'll all be good.
That's why I'm glad to be going first.
Yes. Lucky you.
Okay.
When everyone's talking, then I think it's possible.
Okay, are we ready? Are we all good? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this examination of Tamara Pearl, to her work. Those of you in the room and those of you online, welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Squamish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Katsi, and Coquitlam's people on whose traditional territories our three campuses stand. And we also acknowledge the traditional lands and territories represented by all participants joining us today from their respective remote locations. I would like to introduce the candidate, Tamara Pearl, and the committee members, beginning with the external examiner, Dr. Barb Taves, who is online. The internal examiner, Dr. Michael Ling, who is also online. And the committee members, Dr. John Burrows, who is online, Dr. Brenda Morrison, who is seated beside me, and the senior supervisor, Dr. Hee-Soon Bai. My name is Charles Scott. If you have your cell phone, remember to put your phones on mute so it won't disturb anyone. Those of you attending online who are not on the committee, we will mute your cameras during the examination. The procedure is as follows. First, Ms. Pearl will give an oral presentation lasting about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we will proceed with a first round of questioning, beginning with the external examiner, Dr. Barb Taves, and then the internal examiner, Dr. Ling, then Dr. Burrows, Dr. Morrison, and finally the supervisor, Dr. Bai. We will likely have a second round of questioning, and I'll do a brief check-in at the end of the first round to see how everybody's doing, and perhaps we might need a short break. There are four possible outcomes for the examination. The dissertation may be passed as is with no need of any revisions. The second outcome is that the dissertation is passed with minor revisions to be performed to the satisfaction of the supervisor. Third outcome, the committee feels a more extensive revisions are necessary with a re-examination to follow at a later time. And finally, the thesis may be failed. At the conclusion of the committee questioning, we will invite a few questions from the audience if we have time, if things go well. After this, we will ask Tamara and the attendees to leave the room while the committee deliberates. Those online can remain in the Zoom meeting, and the committee members who are online will meet in a breakout room. When the deliberations are completed, we will allow everybody to enter the room, re-enter the room. So metaphorically and literally, don't go far. I'd now like to invite Tamara to give her presentation.
Hey, thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone, for coming in person and online. Really appreciate the support. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the lands that we are meeting on today and that I live and work on and studied on and did my research on are the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, Squamish, Musqueam, and Chehalis nations. I'd also like to acknowledge my own ancestors who are Iraqi Jewish on my mother's side and Israeli and Polish Jewish on my father's side. I wouldn't be here without their ability to transform their struggles into love. I'd like to thank my husband, Brett, for being with me on this crazy journey, including going out and getting printer ink during a snowstorm last night, the last minute, and with me every step of the way. Thank you. And to my committee, senior supervisor Hee-Soon Bai, and committee members Brenda Morrison and John Burrows, the container that you guys created for me to do this kind of crazy and difficult exploration was really supportive, and I couldn't have done it without you. Okay, so my dissertation is titled Responding to Evil as a Fragmenting Force Through an Ethic of Love and Boundaries, Inspiration from a Healing Prison. I have to advance this, but it's not advancing. Am I doing something wrong? Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, so today I'm going to take you through a journey. And here's a map of the terrain. So we're going to start at Vista 1, which is why I did this inquiry. Then we're going to go on to an art exploration that I did that helped me conceptualize evil as a fragmenting force. Then we're going to talk about my methodology, which I call kaleidoscoping, based on the metaphor of a kaleidoscope. And then we find ourselves at a healing village called Kwukwukwelp, which is a minimum security prison and has a unique model for healing. And I'm going to share some of the findings that I got from there. And then we'll end up at by sharing what I learned from the staff there, which I call an ethic of love and boundaries. So I started with the research question, what is a healthy or integrative or whole-making relationship to evil? The question's probably been with me since childhood, since I heard about the Holocaust and how it affected my family. But then in 2002, my brother, Daniel Pearl, who was a journalist, was murdered by Islamic terrorists in Pakistan. And that made the question kind of change from sort of something in the background to something that just had to be answered. I was seeking a framework on how to respond to horrendous harm. So, for example, after 9/11, I heard two responses. One was bomb the axis of evil, which is violent and rigid and not effective. And the second was send them rice, which is also ill-informed and ineffective. So I wondered whether we can imagine a framework for a healthier and more effective response to whatever we might consider evil, to heal both the internal fragmentation that happens and also the fragmentation in external relationships that happens after that kind of destruction. Particularly curious about what we want to teach our children about how to respond to evil, whatever they consider evil. So there are many possible responses to evil. For example, revenge, collapse, denial, trying to change it, ignoring it, numbing, punishing it, letting it go, being destroyed by it, compassion, and so on. I heard some more possible responses during an arts-based exploration that I did with my class. I asked each participant to paint something they considered evil, and those varied widely, and then notice their response. So some of their responses were, keep it as it is, but hidden, or stab it, ask something of it, ask it to cry, try to clean it up, rescue something from it, expand part of it. So we have a lot more options than we normally think. In order to set out on this journey, first I needed to conceptualize evil. I wasn't really interested in how people differentiate between evil and just horrendous harm. I was more interested in what makes somebody call something evil. So I started with an arts-based exploration based on the felt sense. And felt sense is a term coined by Eugene Gendlin in the 1960s to describe that embodied knowing that we experience on the edge of our awareness. So sometimes we walk into a room and we can feel tension in the room. So that would be considered a felt sense. Gendlin believed that we feel things first with this inner wisdom, and then we put words to it. So I thought about something that I considered evil, and I can't even remember what it was at this point. And then I let my body use the pens and the charcoal and just move with whatever that felt sense, wherever it took me. And I made these chaotic marks, and I ended up feeling compelled to cut out around them. And I ended up with a bunch of fragments that I could not put back together. And that's when I realized that evil, we call something evil because it fragments us. And that partly happens because it's incomprehensible. What fragments could be our worldview, it could be our trust in the world, it could be our sense of our self or our agency, it could be our community, or something else precious to us. So all of these were present after 9/11, particularly our trust in the world got fragmented. So if you take a moment to think about something that you consider evil, you might notice that it's uncomfortable. Something inside you just isn't fitting together as well as if you were, for example, to think about someone you love. So just notice for a moment how these felt senses are different in your body. So I looked in the literature to see if there were any theorists that resonated with this idea. And I found Fred Alford in his book, What Evil Means to Us. He interviewed a whole range of people. And he ended up hearing their experiences. So for example, one person said evil is going down into a dark basement. It was quite a range. And from these, he defined evil as an experience of dread. This is a quote from Fred Alford. What is uncontained is experienced as evil because it is uncontained, overwhelming, beyond limits. Evil is that which threatens to obliterate the self, overcoming its boundaries. And Nell Nodding in her book, Women in Evil, defined evil as that which harms or threatens us with harm and destruction. And I feel like these definitions describe our reactions to the underlying process of fragmentation. So I prefer my conceptualization of evil as a subjectively experienced fragmenting force, because first of all, it includes a verb, fragment, and it describes a process instead of a static state. It's both visual and somatic, and mostly because the solution is implied. To counteract fragmenting, we need a whole-making force. And later I will call this whole-making force love. So I asked myself, what can I do with these fragments? I tried to arrange them on paper in an orderly way, but that did not give me a felt sense of wholeness. I kept using my felt sense as a guide. And finally, I drew a circle around them, and I found the feeling of wholeness I was looking for. The circle created a container that changed the relationship between the fragments. And I started to think about effective containers that help the fragments feel whole. For example, if we think of a classroom, it could be a healing container that connects students to themselves, to each other, to ideas, and so on. Or it can perpetuate fragmentation. Same with a prison. It can be either a healing place or, more commonly, a destructive institution. I experimented with the size and the strength of the boundary of the circle. So the one on the left felt too light to me, the container. And that could be a place where there are not enough boundaries. The one in the middle felt too rigid to me. So that could be a place where the boundaries are too rigid, doesn't allow for freedom of expression of the fragments within it. But the one on the right felt the right kind of felt sense for my wholeness. And from this, I take that we can use our felt sense to tune to the degree of wholeness and to create effective healing containers. So healing containers do what a kaleidoscope does. They create harmonious relationships. My colleague, Lori, thought of a kaleidoscope when looking at my drawings, and that started me experimenting with kaleidoscopes. So I made one and I put random fragments inside, including scraps of paper and a Tylenol tablet and just anything. And I took some photographs. And then I realized that a kaleidoscope is a whole-making container that uses boundaries and reflection and repetition to create more harmonious relationships between the fragments. And that what's being transformed is not necessarily the fragments, but the relationship between them and their environment. So kaleidoscoping as a verb creates wholeness by transforming chaos into order. And that's what I attempted to do with my dissertation. And I drew from my background in different fields and different areas I'd worked in, and brought together Indigenous justice and healing frameworks, emergent Western healing justice frameworks, which include restorative justice, healing education frameworks, and psychotherapeutic frameworks. They share some commonalities, and these are that they all prioritize relational values. They share a common goal of repairing and healing, repairing harm, enhancing well-being. And they utilize a holistic viewpoint, which emphasizes the importance of the context. And all of them are based on the interconnectedness of human beings. So using these frameworks, I return to my question: what is a healthy response to evil? The most dangerous responses to evil are othering, dehumanizing, and demonizing. So demonizing is when you perceive someone or a group of people as evil, and that evil is attributed to their character and not just to what they may have done. Dehumanizing and demonizing cause more disconnection and fragmentation and lead to more violence. So in order to look for different responses, I conducted a qualitative research study at Kukukwelp Healing Village, which is a minimum security federal prison and Indigenous healing lodge, which operates under a unique paradigm and partnership between Correctional Services Canada and the Chehalis Band. Colonization was a fragmenting force which has attempted to destroy Indigenous culture and communities, and which led to disproportionately high rates of incarceration of Indigenous people in Canada. And this facility attempts to heal this fragmentation and give people their lives and their connection to their culture back. This is a sweat lodge being taken apart at Kukukwelp. The sweat lodge ceremony is just one example of how Kukukwelp creates integration like a kaleidoscope through transforming the relationship between the fragments. And we can think of the fragments in this case as like traumatized internal pieces of themselves, or as the fragments that help heal that include the natural landscape and the staff and Indigenous culture and spirituality. And I'd like to mention that at Kukukwelp, offenders are called residents instead of inmates. So this is in and of itself a defragmenting use of language. And I don't mean to imply that anyone at the prison is evil, but many of them have committed acts which their victims and other people would call evil. So at the prison, I asked a little modified question: how do the staff at Kukukwelp Healing Village form healing relationships with the residents there? How did the staff view the residents and the sometimes heinous crimes that they committed in a way that enabled them to still form these healing relationships quite successfully? So staff are mostly non-Indigenous and are guided by both Corrections Canada policy and the 3 to 4 Indigenous elders who set the climate. I used what I called a kaleidoscoping methodology, which is based on seeing the beauty or wholeness at the prison and within each person, just like we see beauty when we look through a kaleidoscope. It also includes prioritizing relationships and always considering the wider social context of the prison. One of the main reasons that I decided to do my research there is that right away I noticed that the staff integrated love and boundaries in an extremely proficient manner. And I felt that I wanted to understand how they did this, because I felt like this was a healthy response to people who have committed harmful acts. So the prison literature identifies what I call love and boundaries in different ways. The dual roles of prison guards include a helping role, which requires them to help prisoners to reintegrate into society, and a security role, which requires them to make sure that the public is safe. And these are often seen as conflicting. Some of the ways that they are characterized are that the staff need to be both enforcer and helper. They need to provide both support and maintain control. At Kukukwelp, these dual roles were interpenetrating instead of conflicting. So let's look at a few of my findings. I asked both the residents and the staff to use 3 words to describe Kukukwelp. These are these are the residents' responses, and these are the staff responses. So the most common word for both staff and residents was healing. The word family is prominent because they referred to Kukukwelp as the Kukukwelp family. Spiritual, peaceful were also common for both staff and residents. But I don't think a typical prison would be described this way. Both staff and residents saw healing as a transformative process of overcoming the past to move forward in a better way with a new relationship to themselves and others. And here's some example of each of those things. The overcoming the past, an example by a resident is crying when I revealed something that I have never told anyone. An example of moving forward in a better way is a fresh, thorough process, restructuring my synapses and thinking skills. An example of a new relationship to self and others is, I learned that I am a human being, not a beast. I can control myself and it's okay to ask for help. The residents used verbs that had the implication of connection or connecting. So some of the verbs that they used to describe healing was mend, reconnecting, gathering, restructuring, returning, coming home. And the staff said things like, healing is to make whole again. Healing is to see the worth in yourself. Healing is getting over scars and learning from mistakes. So what did the staff need to think and feel in order to form these healing relationships with the residents? Their main value was that they saw the residents as human beings. We have a welcoming ceremony, and that's a first step. This is a quote from a staff. When they wrap that blanket around you and they tell you that this is your new home, and then you're lined up, staff, inmate are all lined up together. There's no separation. We take you in as a human being in that ceremony. Seeing everyone as human is the exact opposite of dehumanizing or demonizing. Staff who didn't see everyone as equals did not fit into the culture at Queequeg. All the others' values flowed from that. So they felt that because they saw everyone as human, they felt like they could change and reintegration is possible. They believed that there was a reason that the residents committed the crimes, which probably includes their social history or the context they were in. They saw them as having made mistakes, never having received guidance, having lost their connection to their culture and spirituality. And they said, this could be my son or my grandson or me. We are all capable of evil acts given the right circumstances. They didn't attribute evil to the character of the people who committed the crime. Instead, they differentiated between the people and the act. And they said we are all interconnected and emphasized the importance of community, using words like communal, cooperation, and family. As I looked at what allowed them to create healing relationships, I remembered my very first visit there. A correctional staff member told me, you can look through thousands of correctional documents and never find the most important word, love. One staff member, after thinking about it, said, I don't love them as friends, but I probably do as humans, if that makes sense. I realized he wasn't speaking about love as an emotion, but as an ethic or a worldview. What is love then? Bell Hooks suggested that love is a professional ethic of practice based on relationships as a transformational political force. The idea of love being a transformational political force fits well with Queequeg because we need that kind of force to heal from Canada's history of colonization. Building on Hooks, Buteau researched social workers' conceptualizations of love in their work and talked about love as spiritual interconnectedness and emancipatory praxis. Godin built on Buteau and Hooks and focused on how love challenges injustice. She says the love ethic is a model of relationship-oriented activism encompassing dialogue, nonviolence, interconnectedness between people and between people and nature, reflexivity, shared power, and solidarity. I really appreciate that she included nature in her definition, since immersion in nature, and particularly the stream, were very important at Queequeg. John Burroughs describes how Anishinaabe learn about love from nature. for example, from the mouth of a river that nourishes and sustains with flows of energy, sustenance, and power. In all of these, we see the importance of relationships, the spiritual dimension of interconnectedness, and the power to transform. In this way, love is like a kaleidoscope. The love that I saw at Quiquaquel, I conceptualize as a whole-making transformational force that honors all of life and our interconnectedness. In its wholeness, it encompasses emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and political realms. But what I saw at the prison included more than love. I saw strong boundaries. Most of the staff did not see boundaries as separate from love, but as a part of love. They said, boundaries are loving. You wouldn't cross a boundary because you want to teach the residents how to succeed in society. One staff member described the integration of love and boundaries as knowing which type of touch to use. It's about learning when to use your soft hands, your gloved hands, or your boxing gloves. The soft hand is a kind of mothering. You want to bring the guy along with you to have him understand we care about you and we don't want you to hurt yourself. The gloved hands is where you need to be firm and fair and be balanced. And boxing gloves, she described as, you will absolutely not do this in the future. That is absolutely disrespectful, inappropriate, and not conducive in this environment. If the residents broke an important rule, they were sent with care to a higher security institution. So I conceptualize an ethic of love and boundaries as an orientation of love, which is a whole-making transformational force that honors and protects all of life and our interconnectedness. So I want to point out that this is an ethic or a worldview and not necessarily a feeling. The feelings of the staff members ranged wildly from I care about them and I think about them when I'm not here to I don't give a shit about them, but I care about the community and I care about victims. And yet everybody seemed the same. I only interviewed staff that were considered effective. So everyone treated the residents with care and respect. So it seems like you don't need to have to feel a certain way in order to have this ethic of love and boundaries. I'd like to read this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that describes a similar kind of love and boundaries. He says, I don't think of love as, in this context, emotional bosh, but I think of love as something strong that organizes itself into powerful direct action. We are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. There is a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. The kaleidoscope is a method for a healing container. Now it's my guide when I feel fragmented. I kind of try to collect all my fragmented thoughts and feelings, and I try to find a container that helps create wholeness. And I continue to do this artwork, and I think it's going to be an ongoing practice of trying to help the fragments find a sense of wholeness. This is my brother, Danny. So I was pretty much done with my dissertation, and I realized that I needed to return to my question. What is a healthy relationship to evil? And ask how I can apply this idea of love and boundaries to my brother's killers. This was a very difficult section for me to write. The boundaries part was easy. They show no regret, and they continue to orchestrate terrorist acts from prison, so they need to remain there. The love part was harder. First, I tried to understand what might have motivated them, but that did not help. Then I decided to put all my uncomfortable and fragmented feelings and thoughts into an imaginary kaleidoscope, and I was relieved to notice that they were accompanied by fragments of other parts of my life. They existed side by side with fragments of my favorite plants, laughter, the healing waters of the Pacific Ocean, and this created the right relationship between the fragments. I could accept that people do horrific things, and that is part of the reality of this world, but just a small part. When I created the right relationship between the fragments, I could see the whole and its beauty. It felt that I had become the kaleidoscope. This created internal wholeness, but the question remained, what does love mean externally when applied to my brother's killers? The love part means that I would help them to take a better path if they wanted to, and that I care about the community and protecting future victims, that I will do everything I can to prevent them from fragmenting me and others further, But most importantly, the love part means I will not dehumanize them, particularly because that's what they did to Danny. Thank you.